I will first make a brief introduction in Catalan about the whole conference and these things. Then I'm gonna say hello to you, but then I will read your bio, your CV in English. Then I will speak again a little bit in Catalan just to make sure people start from the same starting point and know something about the the Good Friday Agreement, but just a tiny bit so they know what is it, which I understand they know, but you never know. And then we start with the first question, in which you can obviously explain the Good Friday Agreement and all these things. As I told you, take the time you wish for it. We have plenty of time for each question, and we go for that, and hopefully we have a happy headline about independence. Okay, so here we go. Let me situate myself and see. Okay, so Vinyet, jo començo,
D'acord, ja està gravant.
Perfecte. Espera un moment que canviaré passa que no em veig ara, espera. Molt bé, doncs començo. Bon dia a tothom i benvinguts a aquesta segona part de la conferència sobre Irlanda, Europa i els drets col·lectius dels pobles. Aquesta, com dèiem la setmana passada, és un acte sobre un país amb el qual teníem pendent d'obrir una conversa i estem molt contents d'haver-ho pogut fer en dues parts. La primera part, que va ser amb el professor Liam Kennedy, està més concentrats en l'aspecte més històric, en parlar d'uns fets i un episodi de conflicte armat que evidentment ha marcat les relacions no només dins Irlanda sinó també amb el Regne Unit, però també ha afectat les prioritats d'algunes de les persones visquent a Irlanda, com van veure les conclusions a les que s'arriben quan s'ha patit d'una manera tan intensa un episodi bèl·lic com el d'Irlanda, doncs algunes prioritats se situen en l'estabilitat. I això fa que tots els criteris vagin al voltant d'aquesta estabilitat, i per això en alguns casos es busquen o es demanen majories molt amples, pensant que aquesta seguretat immediata d'aquesta manera està més garantida. Quan la prioritat són d'altres, que és la llibertat o l'exercici dels drets humans, potser les conclusions són unes altres. I això és el que volem avui entendre amb un altre professor. Aquest és el professor de drets humans, específicament, el professor COLIN HARVEY, de Queen's University of Belfast, al qui ara li donem la benvinguda. Hello, good morning, Colin. We are so happy to have you here with us. Welcome to the Catalan Summer University.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really delighted to be with you today.
Thank you. I per introduirem, llegiré un breu sobre en Colin perquè tots tinguem clar quines són les seves àrees d'especialització. Colin Harvey is Professor of Human Rights Law in the School of Law, Queen's University in Belfast, a Fellow of the Senator George J. Mitchell Institute for Global Peace, Security and Justice, and an Associate Fellow of the Institute of Irish Studies. He has served as head of the law school, a member of Senate, a director of the Human Rights Center, and as a director of research. Before returning to Queen's in 2005, he was Professor of Constitutional and Human Rights Law at the University of Leeds. He has held visiting positions at the University of Michigan, Fordham University, and the London School of Economics and Political Science. He has taught us on the George Washington University, Oxford University Summer School in International Human Rights Law, and on the International Human Rights Program at the University of Oxford. He's a member of the academic panel at Doughty Street Chambers, a senior research associate, Refugee Law Initiative, School of Advanced Study, University of London, and a member of the Gender Identity Panel. Professor Harvey was a member of the REF 2014 Law Subpanel and a member of the REF 2014 Equality and Diversity Advisory Panel. He has served as a commissioner on the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission and as a member of the Northern Ireland Higher Education Council. He is the editor of the series Human Rights Law in Perspective, Hart Bloomsbury, and is on the editorial boards of Human Rights Law Review, Northern Ireland Legal Quarterly, and European Human Rights Law Review. He has written and taught extensively on human rights law and constitutional law, and recently led an ESRC-funded project on the consequences of Brexit for Northern Ireland, BrexitLawNI.org. So obviously it's a great pleasure to share this conversation with you precisely on human rights. If I may first, in Catalan, I would like just to make a really brief introduction to the agreement of Good Friday Agreement. El que volia abans de donar la paraula i començar ja amb el professor Harvey, per tots aquells que potser no esteu tan avesats amb la qüestió irlandesa, només com a punt, perquè en aquesta conversa serà un de les peces claus. Voldria explicar que el que es diu el Good Friday Agreement, que és el pacte del divendres sant, és l'acord que es va arribar i que es va signar a l'abril del 1998 i amb el qual es va finalitzar doncs, tot un període de conflicte armat a Irlanda que va començar als anys 60 i que a partir dels 90 es va encaminar cap a un procés de pau. Aquest acord, que de fet en són dos, però es van votar en dos referèndums diferents, un al nord d'Irlanda i l'altre a la República d'Irlanda, la resta de la illa. El que aporta de nou en pactes anteriors és el fet que realment centre el dret de l'autodeterminació, de fet l'exercici de l'autodeterminació com una part primordial de l'acord, estableix les dues identitats, la britànica però també la irlandesa, i el voler la independència total de la illa i la reunificació s'entén no com una alternativa de subversió o quelcom complicada, sinó de fet se situa en peu d'igualtat amb el que seria l'opció de voler romandre dins del Regne Unit. Per tant, és totalment constitucional el voler dins de, i gràcies a aquest acord, voler la independència i treballar per la reunificació d'Irlanda. Dit això, i per no estendre'ns més, que és molt interessant poder escoltar el professor Harvey, començaríem la conversa amb ell. So, Professor, even though the Brexit negotiations undertaken by the UK governments, May and Johnson, have given an outcome very much affected or tailored by the Good Friday Agreement, would you say that the Belfast Agreement is respected in full by the Brexit option? And is the no Brexit still the preferred option for the people of Ireland?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. That's a great question. I think we need to just consider Brexit itself. If you think about it, although the UK voted to leave the European Union. Majority of people in Northern Ireland voted to remain, and actually you'll know that the majority of people in Scotland as well voted to remain in the European Union. So I think there's a real sense in Northern Ireland that the region, the jurisdiction, has been taken out of the European Union against its will. And I think that's a very, very strong view. If you think about it, what Brexit does is it makes the border on the island of Ireland now an external border of the European Union. It almost, if you like, repartitions the island, you know, and that's caused a lot of difficulties and problems. It creates a fundamental difficulty for the Good Friday Agreement. As you'll know, the Good Friday Agreement is our peace agreement, if you like. It's where all the political parties and both governments, with the support of the international community and others, came together to reach a political and peace agreement, a compromise, if you like, a constitutional compromise to help secure a peaceful and democratic way forward. And I think importantly for our conversation today, you'll know that the Good Friday Agreement contains a very specific mechanism around the right of self-determination of the people of Ireland. And I think that is in itself has become a major part of the post-Brexit discussion. But if you like, Brexit creates all sorts of tensions because the Good Friday Agreement is based on the idea of equality between British citizens and Irish citizens. And, you know, what Brexit does is it means, you know, Irish citizens continue to be European Union citizens. British citizens, you know, in a sense, are now are not. So it's created fundamental problems and tensions for the Good Friday Agreement. I think one of the fascinating aspects of the negotiations between the British government and the EU was the extent to which the Good Friday Agreement featured in those conversations. And actually, if you look now at the Irish protocol to the withdrawal agreement, the way in which there are protections in place to try and limit the damage for this society. Hello, we lost the link there for a moment.
Hello. So, sorry, yeah, we did technical problems today.
Yeah.
Don't leave us alone. But
Yeah.
please, I couldn't follow your ending of the question. I guess you may finish it, or do you want to?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, Brexit has created fundamental problems for the Good Friday Agreement. It has really had a very destabilizing impact on this society. And it's raising profound questions really about the constitutional future of Northern Ireland. And that's where the right to self-determination provisions in that agreement are becoming a very live issue. One of the fascinating implications of Brexit is that more and more people here are talking about the constitutional question and the question of whether Northern Ireland will remain within the UK. And obviously one thing that Brexit does is that the option of Irish reunification, the self-determination option, also now becomes a way for Northern Ireland to rejoin the European Union.
Yeah.
And so that has added a really interesting new dynamic to the conversation about self-determination here. Not only is that about reunifying the island, but it also now becomes a question about the north of the island, Northern Ireland, rejoining the European Union. And I think that has become a fascinating aspect of the discussion.
Indeed. And following one of the points you were making, I mean, it's true that Brexit has fueled the support for independence in Scotland and Wales, and you were pointing the same in the case of the Irish people. But how do Irish people see the way forward to achieve this reunification of the island, or the reunification with the European Union, maybe through a referendum, or which is the method you are discussing there?
Really relevant to the discussion today is, one of the fundamental features of the Good Friday Agreement is that the right to self-determination provisions are agreed. So we have a political agreement that's underpinned by international law, a British-Irish agreement that creates a mechanism and a pathway for that to be achieved, and that's agreed. And so what Brexit has done is that more and more people are now looking at that mechanism within the Good Friday Agreement, and they're asking the question, when will that mechanism be triggered in order to give people here a choice? I suppose, we could talk a bit more about the nature of that mechanism, but I think that's an important point to underline, and probably very interesting for the conversation we're having today, is that mechanism was agreed, it's in our peace agreement, and it's underpinned legally. It's got a very sort of precise mechanics, but it's there already. So the question for us here is, when will that be triggered? And doing the preparatory work and the preparation and planning so that when we do come to have our referendums on the island, and interesting to note, the idea in the Good Friday Agreement is that we will have concurrent referendums, that we will have two referendums at the same time, one in the north and one in the south, in order to either achieve the reunification of Ireland or staying within the UK.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and indeed, now one of the things that I sure in Catalonia we're interested is understanding the sociologics, no, in terms of, we know that the increased support to, for example, a political party as Sinn Féin in the elections, that this political party is already in the government, in a coalition in the Northern Ireland, and in the Republic of Ireland in the south. It won with votes the last elections, but they didn't manage to conform a government. From Catalonia perspective, do we need to understand that this increase is because people, maybe because of the Brexit, mixing it all up, they see in this political party now the way to take forward this reunification, and how does it work? I mean, do you have polls in the sense of which is a percentage in the south or in the north in respect the support to this reunification, and the people that maybe don't see it through, which are the reasons why, even though they agree on the nation of Ireland, and obviously the best for the nation of Ireland, maybe they are not that confident on the reunification for which reasons? Maybe economical or?
I think there's there are a number of things to differentiate out here. One of the interesting things about the constitutional conversation at the moment is the extent to which that has been a sort of civic-led conversation as well as a party political discussion. Right. And so, what's been interesting in the last number of years since Brexit has been the number of civil society initiatives that are beginning to raise this question. So, for example, last year a major conference was held at one of our major conference centres in Belfast, the Waterfront Hotel. Really by a civic society initiative to bring people together to discuss this question. Obviously, the rise of Sinn Féin politically has made a big difference as well. Sinn Féin's electoral performance in the south of Ireland recently, their electoral success, the fact that Sinn Féin are in the government in Northern Ireland, and obviously Sinn Féin, the Irish unity question is absolutely central to their political agenda, and they've made very clear they would like to see these referendums happening within the next 5 years here. But I think also in addition to that, it's just the wider civic conversation. There's a real sense here that Brexit has changed the dynamics of the question. People who perhaps weren't thinking about Irish reunification 4 or 5 years ago are now beginning to talk about it. People are wondering, to put it rather crudely, do people want to sort of, hitch their wagon to Boris Johnson and the Brexiteers, or would they rather follow the direction of travel from Dublin and the European Union? So I think Brexit has changed the conversation here. In terms of polling, there's a mixed picture in Northern Ireland in terms of polling, and different polls give different results. Recent ones I've been looking at, put it, people have used the language of on a knife edge. Some polls make it very, very close. Other polls have different outcomes. In the south of Ireland, it's been fairly consistent in the south of Ireland that a majority of people in the south would support Irish reunification. I think you also raised the question of Scotland. Scotland is absolutely fascinating at the moment. There have been a number of polls in Scotland over the last few months showing a clear majority in Scotland wants independence. And one of the fascinating things to watch in the next year, the next few years, will be Boris Johnson and his government, whether they will really agree to the request by the Scottish government to have another referendum. And that's going to be a very, very interesting debate in the time ahead. I think what, again, underline about the process in Northern Ireland that's really quite interesting is the sense in which our self-determination provisions were agreed. So people know what they are. There's obviously debates around the process and how that will work, but they've been politically agreed by political parties, by both governments, and they've also been underpinned in law. So in a sense, people know what the process will be. And I think that's quite interesting in a wider international context too.
Yeah, well, I'm sure for us it's very interesting to listen and to acknowledge the grassroots movements that you are mentioning that they have been being organized in Ireland in favor of the reunification, and it's not all in the role of political parties. That we are in Catalonia, we're big also in the social movement, but we didn't really had any news or information unless you look at for yourself, but I mean in media. So we were not quite aware of this, and that's great. And also highlighting what you were just mentioning now about Scotland and this scenario in which the UK soon is going to be themselves portrayed as in what is going to be their decisions on a second referendum in Scotland. And this is a very interesting topic because for Catalans, there are millions of European citizens that they are struggling, and we are working in a peaceful democratic matter to exercise the right not only to self-determination, but the right to independence, because it is a right of people. And as the occupied nations, as we are the Catalan countries, Euskal Herria, or Flanders, or the South Tyrol, or Veneto, we are positive that that the state prerogative to consent the right to independence is a cul-de-sac. It's a no exit road. Although self-determination, as the name points out, is a self-determination. So, as a professor and your vast experience in human rights, I mean, democracy cannot just tell us to be resigned, right? I mean, it can, and even less when societies as the Catalans, we've voted and we've conformed, we achieved to conform absolute majorities in our parliament in favor of independence and full government of independentists, or at least they call themselves independentists. So what is the scope? I mean, the threat of the state, of the Spanish state, or of any state to violence, that threat doesn't mix, right, with the concept of democracy and human rights. So, or either we wait for some World War VIII, which I'm not that keen on that way, or maybe should we review our complex or our shortcomings when it comes to the fear to the victory that seems to hold back our governments, because obviously the threat of violence cannot stop a democratic mandate as independence, can it?
Well, the range of questions there, but really, to first of all, obviously the right to self-determination is a widely recognised right in international law. I think on a practical basis, on a political basis, holding people in a constitutional arrangement against their will, is unacceptable and unsustainable in the longer term. I think you rightly put an emphasis on peaceful and democratic means that all sides in these constitutional conversations approach this in a peaceful and democratic way. You rightly mentioned the state. When we think about the state, Spanish state, the British state, these states are bound by international human rights obligations in terms of how they treat people within their jurisdiction. So there's clearly a framework for how this should be conducted legally and what people can and cannot do. But when we think about what's happening at the moment in terms of your own situation as Scotland, it really it's unsustainable and unacceptable to hold a people in a constitutional arrangement when it is clearly against their democratically expressed wish to leave. So the question for me in that is, how do we find peaceful and democratic ways forward? And I suppose, one of the lessons from Northern Ireland and Ireland, really, the Irish peace process context is dialogue and finding political dialogue and political routes forward in order to agree a framework for that to take place is one way in which that can be done. That requires both an understanding of law, but I think more importantly, politics and the work of politics to try and work on and agree a framework for taking the right to self-determination forward in a peaceful and democratic way. And I think what's interesting in that, and I realise how difficult this can be in the Catalan context and in relation to Scotland as well, is the issue of international and European support for the framework. You'll notice that what was interesting in Northern Ireland, the Irish peace process, is a number of international actors were sort of there, standing behind and supporting the process. So in a sense, when you thinking about other contexts, working in the international community, working with other states and actors to try and build international support for operationalizing the right to self-determination in a peaceful and democratic way can actually be very helpful. Also the formulation that we worked out here was a very, specific and unique one. Our right to self-determination rests on concurrent votes in both jurisdictions at the same time. And those votes are majority votes. So I'm absolutely clear in my mind that what we're talking about, for example, in Northern Ireland, is 50 plus 1%, and majority support for reunification should achieve that outcome. I have major difficulties with people who argue that there should be special majorities put in place to try and block that. I think that's unhelpful. But as you know, as these conversations progress, you will find that people often put more and more procedural and other hurdles in the way of even exercising the right to have a referendum in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, and therefore, for what you are saying, and stretching the fact that everybody is keen on the dialogue, and because as political people and as Democrats, basically dialogue is a fundamental aspect of the political game, if you want to say it this way. The point is that once there's a side that does not want to dialogue because does not recognize your right to self-determination, because obviously they make up you are not a nation. Obviously, it's very important the alliances that you have managed to build internationally, but. Somehow then we have, first of all, the responsibility from countries like Catalonia to have the politicians that believe that we have the right to independence and actually don't fool themselves when the state threatens you with violence. Because the first time it threatens you with violence and then you decide not to obey people's mandate, you do a very bad job for democracy, and not only for your country, but for other countries aspiring to the same. And the second aspect that I would like to share with you is that there's some basic human rights, collective rights, democracy standards that should not lay down on the capacity or attitudes or good attitudes of politicians to actually get other Democrats on board. I mean, Democrats in Europe, understanding the situation, should not be convinced or seduced by the capacity of seduction of a given government. It needs to be beyond that, something else, something that makes the whole play of democracy a basic background for and a basic ground for all of us. So we all should feel interpelled, should feel called to, even though the government does it better or worse, because it's the basic standards that are in play for all of us, for a Sweden, for a German, for any European. And that is where maybe we find that the difficulties, and we would like to one more confirm that self-determination and human rights are something that is shared still by European frame. Do you agree that European values still are prominent in Europe in the terms of democracy, and that therefore something should happen besides how good are in public relations the Catalan government?
Yeah, I think you make a good point. It's a good point about internationalizing and Europeanizing, if you like. But the conversation. I think, the sense in which, certainly in the Irish peace process, that progress was often made where we were able to internationalize issues and draw upon international support. So again, I think you're right. That's very, very important, and that often requires hard work, patience, and takes time to build up that international support network. It's also important to underline that what we're talking about is not novel or new. We're talking about a right that is widely recognized in law. We're also talking about something that happens around the world. So there's a lot of comparative experience. There's actually European experience to draw upon on how you do this. Scotland did have its first referendum. We saw how that worked. I think also, there's both agreeing to hold a referendum, but there's also finding ways to show that there's an agreed framework, that people can agree a framework for taking forward the dialogue. It's interesting to note that the Good Friday Agreement itself was voted on by people on the island of Ireland. So the Irish people voted to say that, in a sense, we agree this framework. So perhaps there are lessons there, but I think you're absolutely right. In terms of building international and European support for the exercise of the right to self-determination, based on the understanding that in the long term, it is not conducive to European or international stability for people to be held in a constitutional arrangement against their democratic will and without their support. That in itself contributes to instability over the longer term. So it's about having mature, grown-up conversations about agreeing a framework. And really what we're talking about ultimately is allowing people to determine their own future.
Exactly.
And that then becomes an open question about what people would like to do. And I think, in a sense, that's what democracy is about, So I think it's about facilitating that. I realize all the challenges and difficulties, but my own view is that, without an agreed political framework, without international networks and backing and support, it can be difficult to achieve this in a peaceful and democratic way. And I understand all the difficulties in that in your context at present and challenges. Also, like to underline, human rights law is quite clear about what governments can and can't do in relation to how they treat people involved in these processes. And it's also about using those international human rights mechanisms, to challenge the state, to embarrass the state, to hold its actions up to international scrutiny. And you know well that states don't like being embarrassed internationally. States like to be perceived in a respectable way, in a respected way. So it's about using those international human rights mechanisms, using European forums to highlight where states are behaving appallingly, where they're doing things that step outside European values. Then that needs to be, a light needs to be shone on that, using all the available forums and mechanisms that there are in human rights terms, but in political terms as well.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of Catalan people mentioning how the Spanish state care or not about being point out. They sure saying, oh, well, the Spanish state, they actually don't care, as they keep on proving, because they are reaching out and disobeying many human rights law, European law, and other laws, not only human rights, and it's a constant, and it appears in the European reports how they behave on this matter. But of course, at the end of the day, they know that they cannot be the pariah of Europe. But
just worth pointing out, as you know, from our experience, that approach does not work. In the longer term, it will not work in the longer term, because you cannot crush people's aspirations and goals over the longer term. So even taking into account the fact that we're talking about violations of human rights and state abuse of human rights, there's also just the practical question that, you cannot hold a people within a constitutional arrangement over the longer term against their will.
Yeah.
And so, there's legal arguments, but there's also the politics of that over the longer term. So there's a sense in which, that there is a need for other European governments and for the international community to also engage with the Spanish government to make clear that the only way forward is a way forward that recognizes principles around self-determination, the need for a peaceful and democratic way forward, and also an agreed political framework so that dialogue remains the way in which this is taken forward. Because ultimately, to underline what we've been saying again, is that, we're talking about people exercising their democratic rights and a denial of that or an attempt to thwart that where it has happened. And I think that over the longer term is unsustainable and unacceptable. But I do realize that that is about also politics as much as it is about law.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it's very well underlined. You mentioned earlier that the 50% plus one that you consider sufficient because basically it is just not equal democratically equality, in which you cannot demand from one side to have extraordinary resource, but do not have the same demand for the for the supporters of the other option in a referendum. So therefore, obviously, and I think the Commission of Venice also points that right, and mentioning Scotland referendum did not ask for any qualified support of the yes for independence. So we understand that talking on a democratic basis, 50% plus one is a majority, and to not obey that, it means to be obeying the mandate of the 50% less one, right?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and I think it's also important to underline, the background here. The background here is that our peace agreement, the Good Friday Agreement, contains a principle of parity of esteem. In a sense, there should be equality of treatment between the unionist position here and the nationalist position here, that both people have a right to hold views in relation to remaining within the UK or leaving the UK, and they should be treated equally. And so there's a very, very strong sense here that, and it's reflected in our agreement, that to do otherwise would be to almost, give unionism a priority position. It would mean that unionist votes were more important than nationalist votes, So, and I think that would fundamentally go against some of the basic principles of the Good Friday Agreement. So it's clear here that, in my view, a simple majority, 50 plus one, would be enough to achieve Irish reunification. Because to do otherwise would be to simply privilege the unionist position. And so both positions should be treated equally. And I think that's an important point also in your context, that getting agreement that unionism and nationalism are equal positions, political positions that should be treated equally. But I think what that also underlines is the need to do the preparatory work first. It needs to be clear to people before they enter the referendum here, right, on the island of Ireland, is what they're actually voting for, what it will mean. So, if we look at Scotland as well, the idea that, people need to be able to articulate what it is will happen if they vote yes or no in the referendum. But I'm absolutely clear in my own mind that what we're talking about here is a simple majority. And in the Northern Ireland context, anything else would, in my view, breach the Good Friday Agreement. Because, I'm repeating myself, but you're simply privileging then the unionist position if you do anything else.
Exactly, yeah. And another question to conclude maybe is that in Catalonia, we have held a referendum, an official binding referendum called by the parliament and the government, the Catalan government, in 2017, the 1st of October. It was a referendum that everybody believed binding, because also all the speeches given by the president, and so the legitimate, legal, democratic government of Catalonia. That is why probably the whole world could see how everybody was defending the ballot boxes and the votes, because they really meant to be a binding vote. Probably, if not, people would not be so dearly defending or accepting all the violence if it was not because everybody was convinced it was a binding referendum. The point is that, as we know, we suffered the violence of the state, unarmed families waiting to queue to vote. We were sprayed by gas, shot with rubber bullets, and hit by the police in a forceful and really with a lot of rage against us, the people. Even though that we had great results, despite the violence, people stood still and we voted. And we had 96% of votes, so an extraordinary support for independence, with a participation that has been greater than other referendums, significant referendums, as it was here, accepting the European Constitution, etc. I mean, this thing of the participation, I mean, look at Brexit. I mean, it's like 51%. It's not like an extraordinary majority that Brexit won. And it's an independence from Europe of a whole country. No? So the thing is, bearing in mind this violence, what we have is that the Catalan referendum, instead of being something not qualified, because as somebody puts, we do have the right to vote in a peaceful manner. Yes, that's very good, very fine, but we didn't. We suffered violence. And bearing this in mind, is not the Catalan self-determination official binding referendum an example of justification of self-determination? Does it not justify itself the fact that it was conducted suffering the violence of a state? Does that not imply that Catalan people has all the right to self-determine, and if it decides so, to get an independence from a state that agrees on going so far as to hit people because of the voting?
I'd just like to say that I think the approach of the Spanish state has been appalling, shocking, appalling, deeply flawed and problematic. Have every sympathy and solidarity with you in relation to what people have faced over recent years in relation to this. Absolutely clear in my own mind that you cannot hold the people in a state against their will. Where people have, one of the issues in Northern Ireland is we're being removed from the European Union against our will. We essentially voted to stay, and that's the British state renders that irrelevant effectively, legally. So I have enormous sympathy and solidarity with you in terms of what you're currently facing, where you have, expressed a view as to the way forward. I suppose what perhaps I'm also focusing on today is just how do we find peaceful and democratic ways forward based on political dialogue to make sure that that the way forward we find is peaceful and democratic, by holding the state to account and using all the mechanisms that are there internationally at the European level to shine a light on that and challenge state abuses of human rights where they take place. But they then need to find a political and legal framework that means that right to self-determine, that democratically expressed vote can lead to the desired outcome, So I think, the frustration you're expressing today, I utterly understand. In a sense, it's how do we find an agreed way forward to ensure that expression of democratic will is recognized internationally and leads to the outcome that people want to see. And I think, my own view on that, whether, this is helpful or not, is that, without finding an agreed political framework, one based on dialogue that ultimately leads to states, including the Spanish state and international community, recognizing what has actually happened, it can be a very long and frustrating and difficult process. What I would say in relation to that is it's absolutely vital that the pro-independence movement remains unified and develops both a unified message, a unified collective message, but also is unified in its approach to the wider international community, the European states and elsewhere, in terms of what that message is. Ultimately, again, it's vital. We had a conflict where many people died, and nobody wants to see that either being repeated on this island or anywhere else in Europe. So the lesson from here is that we need to find agreed ways forward based on basic principles that the state must uphold and that also others must uphold as well, and agree a framework and then allow that right to self-determination to find its expression and then actually be realized in practice in a way that avoids anybody getting hurt further along the way. And that's one of the lessons for our process here. But you'll know that we're now 22 years on from the Good Friday Agreement. Our referendum process hasn't been triggered yet. We're still waiting for that to happen, although that's an intense debate. But I suppose one thing to keep in mind too is that independence, once achieved, will be forever, if you like. So it's worth getting this right, remaining unified, trying to build support to find a way forward that is peaceful, that is recognized, and that is sustainable over the longer term. And that's hard, requires patience, and you will face fierce resistance along that pathway, as you know.
Yes, absolutely. So, and to finish, we would say that even though they try to picture a scenario in which independence are not possible, and that even politicians sometimes seems to behave in a way that, and they express that the independence is not possible if the state doesn't agree on to. We would say that independence is possible when in a peaceful manner, independence is legal and is legitimate, despite or even though when the state doesn't agree with it. Would you agree with this?
Yeah, maybe, and if it's helpful in relation to that, one of the lessons from Northern Ireland is, the constitutional status here rests on consent. So part of the Good Friday Agreement is that it is recognised that it's up to a majority of people here to determine their own constitutional future, whether they want to stay in the UK or not. And I think that's a useful and helpful way of thinking, about self-determination. People get to decide, and ultimately, I think over the longer term, and again making the point that holding people in constitutional arrangements that they don't want to be in is unsustainable, and is a denial of their right to determine their own future. You know, and the thing, people say, so many people talk about what is realistic and what is not. You know, it's absolutely clear that this can be done, has been done elsewhere in Europe, is in accord with democratic values and European values and international standards. So, but as you know, people will find all sorts of reasons, and they'll put all sorts of procedural hurdles in the way of preventing people realizing their right to determine their own constitutional future.
Good. Well, it has been a real pleasure to listen to you and to listen to your clear determination for democracy. And thank you very much for sharing with us your thoughts. And we really look forward to have Catalan University in presence, so we can invite you to come to our fantastic mountains and visit the Canigó that I'm sure you would like. And so thank you very much for
Thank you,
Professor Harvey.
Thank you, and very much appreciate the invitation. And I really would like to wish you all very, very well in the time ahead, and just to continue to offer us solidarity and support. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Doncs bé, moltes gràcies. Disculpeu els petits problemes tècnics inicials que ens han fet començar més tard de l'hora prevista i continuem amb les diferents converses que teníem des de la UCE amb els diferents actors internacionals. Esperem que us hagi agradat. Qualsevol consulta o pregunta o comentari que vulgueu compartir, ja sabeu que estem en les xarxes socials i que aquesta conferència estarà penjada en el canal de YouTube de la UCE. Bon dia, independència. Països catalans. Fins ara. Gràcies. Adéu.